They're already on.
We'll turn them off for the presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all awake now that the lights are on. We'll call the workshop to order for June 6th, 2024. Eric, would you like to lead the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk Ostrom, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Kendall? Here. Mayor Boudreau?
Here.
Councilmember Halverson?
Here.
Councilmember Young?
Here.
Councilmember Ween is excused. Mayor Pro Tem LaFave? Here. Councilmember Wallace is excused. Interim City Manager Dusha?
Here.
Roll call is complete.
Thank you. Interim Manager Dusha, we have a presentation tonight on homelessness.
We do. Tonight we're going to have a recap of homeless issues Longview has faced over the years. So you will see where we were at one point and where we are now. Chief Huhta, Captain McNew, and Sergeant Watson will be doing this presentation tonight.
Thank you. Chief, before we jump into it, would you like us to hold our questions to the end, or would you like us to jump in if we have questions?
Let's go with questions at the end.
Perfect. Okay. So everybody take notes if you want to ask questions. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Boudreau, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to present information regarding homelessness in Longview. You'll see in the presentation, I think you guys have a preview of it. There'll be no recommendations, and we're not seeking input, or we're seeking no recommended actions from council tonight. Just more of the information, education for tonight. Obviously, this topic has brought out opinions across the spectrum over the past few years in our community. Whether you have been on the left or the right, I would encourage you to listen to tonight's presentation with the intent to understand. Tonight's presentation is going to cover the evolution of homelessness in Longview, key incidents and policy changes, and the department's strategies and responses over time. The aim is to provide an overview of the challenges faced, the lessons learned, and the ongoing efforts to address homelessness effectively in Longview. A little disclaimer, this presentation is not intended to be insensitive to the needs and plight of individuals experiencing homelessness. It aims to provide an objective overview of how Longview Police Department has addressed challenges related to homelessness in our community, while providing public safety services to the community at large. So tonight's presentation, we're going to do a historical context pre-2017. We'll talk about the infamous Martin versus Boise case. We'll talk about from 2017 to 2019 and the creation of camps throughout the city. And we'll talk about Camp Alabama, which was end of December 2019 through December of 2022. We'll talk about the closure of Camp Alabama and briefly about the creation of Hope Village. And then we're going to, more importantly at the end, we're going to talk about the current state of affairs. But we wanted to have a historical context of homelessness because also we know it just didn't start overnight. It did start last year. It's been around in our community for a while. So we wanted to make sure that we were doing the historical perspective. I want to give a shout out at this point to Captain McNew and Sergeant Watson for doing a tremendous job of putting together this presentation for tonight. And they're going to take it from here and cover through the presentation. Like I said, prefer to keep questions held until the end. And then, but if there's a burning question, I guess you can ask that and we'll get to it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Captain McNew and Sergeant Watson.
I guess what I'll add to the question is if there's some clarification that be given right then in the moment that would be really helpful, then just throw it at us. That'd be fine. So thank you. We're pretty excited to give this historical overview. I know I've talked with many members of the audience and many of you, and so we've had a lot of these conversations before, and so a lot of this will be really familiar. So, but I think it'll be neat to see it in a timeline, and so that's kind of the point of what we've come up with here. So. No conversation about the recent history of homelessness in Longview can start without just briefly touching on level overwhelming in Kelso. And so this is not a presentation about Kelso, but these sorts of issues do not know jurisdictional lines. And so we're just going to touch on it. So as everyone here probably knows, there's level overwhelming opens 2015. They are dealing with the fallout from level overwhelming in Kelso. And so I won't go into what those issues were, but the police were heavily involved, and the neighborhood had some similar comments and feedback to the city of Kelso that Camp Alabama had for the city of Longview. And so it's a very similar issue. And ultimately, level overwhelming's house shelter in Kelso closed. So 2017, the emergency shelter, the level overwhelming shelter closes in Kelso, which displaces individuals into our community. And so in conjunction with that, our community and communities across the region were already experiencing an increase in homelessness. And it's not my expertise to speculate why, but our communities across the region were experiencing an increase in homelessness. So we were seeing homeless in our business fronts on Commerce. We were seeing small camps around Longview. And then as however long you've been a police officer here or a community member here, we start to see those numbers start to increase, and they sort of explode in this time frame for whatever reason. And so in conjunction with that, level overwhelming closes and displaces individuals into the community. So Longview PD was at that time dealing mostly with homeless encampments on private property. So then Chief Huhta and Captain Huhta and the administration and department at the time were sending orders down the chain of command to respond to the complaints of private property owners who had large encampments on their property, right? So it's for one reason or the other, it's an eyesore, or they're getting knocks on the door from community development, or they're going to build a Beach Street extension, whatever the reason, they are calling on us to clear out these camps because it's private property. And so this is one example. This was Captain Huhta and his involvement. This was coverage from the Daily News where we cleared out it was a very large in size homeless encampment out where the new Beach Street extension is. There weren't a ton of people out there, but it was well established camps, and it was heavy vegetation, so there was a lot of tunnels and walkways, and it was well established. And private property owner called, and we took a series of actions to systematically take that down, and at the request of the property owner. And so that was done, and the result was it displaced many individuals from that camp into the community. And so, anything to add to that? So when I say we saw a displacement of individuals in the community, that was just one example of a camp that we closed off private property. If you remember, there were large, I know some of you are involved in cleanup on the Fisher's Lane camps and the West Side Highway camps and the Mint Valley camps and Tenant Way and out by the old landfill. There were small camps on private property everywhere, and we were kind of at the request of property owners systematically closing those down. And so while we're doing that, we're pushing them, displacing them elsewhere. And so Sergeant Watson's going to talk about Martin v. Boise, which came in and became very important to this issue we were facing. Go ahead and play it. Does this have audio? Okay.
By the way, when we talk about what the city can and cannot do related to homeless camping, there is a key court case that dictates a lot of those boundaries. So let's dive in our segment, how did we get here? The case is called Martin v. the City of Boise, as in Boise, Idaho, and it's been used to fight camping restrictions in several cities, including Salem. In 2018, the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled a city cannot charge someone with a crime or give them a ticket for sleeping in a public space if there are no shelter beds or there's nowhere else for that person to go. The judge deemed charging someone with a crime in that case, like when they have no other choice, a violation of the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, meaning it qualifies as cruel and unusual punishment. So in cases where you hear of cities and counties weighing camping bans like this, that ruling is often what stands legally in their way.
So as you heard from Captain McNew, we had large encampments being places where multiple people are camping, campsites, tents, shelters of whatnot, throughout our city limits. And the property owners asked us to address that. So we arrested people for trespass, warned them, had them move off of the private property, which pushed them out into the public area. And about that time, Martin v. Boise is happening. And in our profession, the policing, we have laws that are put on board by the legislature, and then we enforce them, and then they get ruled upon by the judicial system. And the judges make rulings that then we have to react to. So Martin v. Boise caused a pause in us in enforcing our own camping ordinance that we had. Martin v. Boise addressed sitting, lying, and sleeping in public, but it didn't preclude municipalities from creating laws that could address such issues as camping in public altogether, addressing the behavior more than just the human that's living. So in our area, the way that manifested is the folks that were displaced from this private property move into public areas, being our public right-of-ways, medians, and as you can see here, our lake bank. Most will probably, if I've been around, remember the many encampments that were down at Lake Sacagawea, both under the 16th and Nichols side, where you can see the shelter there, or even just along by where St. John's is at and over by the grotto. So the tools we then had at the time for enforcement were park hours. Park hours are 10 or 11 at night to 5 in the morning in our parks, that you have to be outside of the parks. There's laws against drinking alcohol in the parks that we would enforce. Smoking, can't smoke in our city parks. So those were the tools that we had for people to address these quality of life issues that were happening. So as we were enforcing down by the Lake Bank area, we being the City of Longview Police Department, I'm going to take a step back in, at this time, this is a picture of me standing there. Back several years ago, I was a corporal. Back in 2012, then Chief Huhta brought back the corporal position and dedicated us corporals to community policing efforts. So that started my path into where I'm at now, deeply rooted with problem-oriented policing and community policing problems, even carrying it on to being a sergeant now. So this is me here reaching out to people into the gazebo, trying to figure out how I can navigate Martin v. Boise, address the behavior that's happening here that is causing some health and sanitation issues, if you will.
So this picture is October 2019. So I'm a corporal at the same time. We're both on opposing shifts, and you were either on days or swing, and I was on graveyard. And so on graveyard patrol, we, through our chain of command, were instructed to strictly enforce the park hours, the drinking in the park, whatever park-related statutes we could. And these are infractions. And so, and by that I mean they're non-criminal. They can't be arrested. By definition, they are the same as a speeding ticket. It's a monetary fine, which people gladly took. And so night after night, we are writing tickets because it's the tool we had at the time based on the statutory or the judicial limitations, and we're writing tickets. And at some point, we pivoted and realized, well, this isn't working. They're just taking our tickets. The statute for criminal trespassing says if you knowingly remain unlawfully somewhere, then that's a crime. And so we thought, well, if you've received multiple, you're here after hours and you shouldn't be tickets, I mean, you're criminal trespassing. And so we started making arrests for these habitual offenders for criminal trespassing. The ones that were not listening to the resources we were providing, not taking direction or redirection to the resources, and just thumbing their nose at us. And so they started going to jail for criminal trespass. And so that started to have some impact. We would, night after night, my crew, not my crew, but the crew I was on, night after night, we were moving these trespassers and park violators all over town. And all night, we're just moving them from place to place, from doorstop to doorstop. It was exhausting for us, and it was exhausting for them. In fact, if you go back and read these daily news articles, which I had the opportunity to do, many of the people quoted in the newspaper, they're talking about how the police, every time we sit down, they're like on us and charging with something. Like, this was the tool we had, this was the community's expectation. We're being told, do something about this, and this is what we did. So we went hard on enforcement, and so and it worked. We drove them night after night around town. Ultimately, and this is another slide, another quote of an individual saying, "Every time I put my head down, the police shut us down. We can't stay here, we can't stay there. There's nowhere left to go." That was the strategy we employed. It was the only tool we had, and the community was loud and clear. Do something. If you remember the lake bank near St. John's, how from like 15th to almost 20th, it was an encampment, and it was short-lived, but it was like it sprung up overnight, and then we had this problem where other users of the lake were complaining, and the police department had to respond in such a way, and the chain of command at the time said, these are the expectations of the community. We need health and sanitation in our parks. And so this is what we did. And so one night in 2019, late 2019, October, November, we, on Graveyard, saw a migration of individuals to City Hall. Like, we watched it happen. And so probably everyone here, certainly everyone up here, remembers the overnight creation of the camp at City Hall. And so you had tents overnight. I remember the chief of police coming in and saying, "What in the world happened last night?" And it's like, that's just where they went. And so the city council at the time then had this issue out here, and now the city is loud and clear saying, what are we going to do about this blight on, R.A. Long's front step? So this is a news article that talks a little bit about it, or a news story, and I think it covers it pretty well. So
the Longview City Council is considering a new ordinance that would restrict homeless camping on public property.
Yeah, city leaders say tents, belongings, and human waste are out of control in front of City Hall. Fox 12's Kendra Kent has a look at the response to this ordinance.
We're just across the street from City Hall, and as you can see behind me, there are a number of tents between us and City Hall just lining the street as well as the median here. And officials say it's been a problem for about a month, and they are now calling it an emergency. And they're going to be voting to ban camping during the day, but campers say they don't have anywhere else to go. In Longview, a trip to City Hall doubles as a visit to one of the area's bigger homeless camps. You can't miss the some 20 to 30 tents lining the lawn and filling the median along Broadway Street.
We're not going nowhere. We're going to be here every night, and we're not going nowhere. They can't make us. It's public property.
But soon the city might do just that during certain hours. City Council is expected to vote Thursday night on a new ordinance that would require campers to pack up and leave during the day. City officials say the growing camp is a public emergency. The area is becoming a safety hazard, leading to access and sanitary issues for city staff, visitors, and even the campers themselves. If passed, camping and storing belongings here would be banned from the hours of 6:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Monday through Thursday. But campers would be allowed overnight daily, as well as 24 hours a day on Friday and through the weekend.
They're just trying to push us out into another county.
Shane Newton told Fox 12 he's been staying here for a couple of weeks. He's used to the constant shuffle of being pushed out, but he says it's another burden on an already tough life, especially for campers who are disabled or lack mobility.
It's hard to get everything packed, moved, put up again, and picked back up.
Wheelchairs are,
Some of us are in wheelchairs.
It's clear others are frustrated too. Drivers honk aggressively as they pass by, and neighbors told Fox 12 they worry about safety and property values. But even so visible, some homeless say they still feel ignored.
We have nowhere to go,
The rent is way up too high.
I would like to see any one of these city officials who live on 725 Social Security. So pay rent and eat.
The city council meeting is tomorrow at 7, and I did reach out to several city council members for comment on this story. I haven't heard back yet from most of them, but I did speak with the mayor tonight, and he told me he does plan on voting to pass this ordinance. Reporting tonight in Longview, Kendra Kent, Fox 12 Oregon.
So part of what was happening is this camp is growing. The community is rising up. This is now like right on our doorstep, and it's very visible. And there were a lot of strong feelings. And some of those strong feelings were, it's the middle of winter. You can't just throw them off the front step without somewhere to go. And so that conversation is happening too. So just like some of the meetings we've seen in here more recently, you have individuals coming in and they're very concerned for the welfare there. So both sides are very upset, and it was quite a position to be in. And so like the news lady said, the next day there was a meeting, and we'll play one more video and then you just get to hear from us for the rest of the time.
Just because we don't have a house, it doesn't mean that we're bad people.
They say you can't fight City Hall.
If they want, they can come down and get to know us.
But you can move onto its front lawn. Why here? Why'd you guys set up here?
So they can see us. There's a problem. Out of sight, out of mind. Well, we're not out of sight.
Indeed, more than 24 tents are in plain sight along Longview's main drag. Campers came here tired of being swept from place to place by police. Police who patrol a city with no big, low-barrier homeless shelter and with a homeless population that jumped by 38% last year. These people came here demanding help. Finally, the city made a move.
I think it was a show last night.
Council members last night amended city code to restrict access to City Hall on nights, weekends, and holidays, and ban tent camping across the city altogether. So the ordinance says the city is doing this to preserve access to City Hall, but also for the good of public safety. And there are a lot of small businesses around here. So I asked owners. None of them wanted to go on camera, but some told me that they have seen a rise in what they call troubling behavior, namely trash. And then one owner told me that a camper, she believes, behaved aggressively toward her and a customer. The reason I'm telling you that is because none of the sitting city council members would meet with us today. Hi, this is Maggie Vespa with KGW. None of them called us back, and on Fridays, City Hall is closed.
It would have passed this ordinance in each section.
Hillary Strobel did meet with us. She was just elected to the council, and she takes her seat next month. She's not a fan of the new ordinance, but she agrees Longview has a problem.
I don't think anybody agrees that this is anything other than dangerous and unsanitary. So whether you want to take the compassionate approach or the punitive approach, everybody agrees that this isn't working.
To help ease the tension, council members last night agreed to give these campers 30 days to leave, and they promised to find them somewhere to go. The new ordinance allows for one hosted encampment, meaning the city will let a willing church or agency host campers on their property. Angela Sprague is optimistic someone will volunteer.
Hopefully it'll be close to town because everything is accessible here. Mental health is here. Core health is here.
In the meantime, people are still sleeping outside, and it's getting cold, really cold. So to keep people alive,
they really get to be people when they come here.
Churches from Longview and Kelso banded together this year to open this severe weather shelter. It's in Longview's First Christian Church, and they're prepared to hold close to 100 people a night. They made their debut Wednesday.
When they're here, is if we can direct them to services that are needed, that is the lowest bar is just to keep people alive. We do want to do more than that.
For its part, the city has less than a month to figure out if they can do more, too. Maggie Vespa, KGW News.
Sometimes as a police officer, you tend to see every hammer as a nail, right? We are sort of a Swiss Army knife where we have a lot of individual tools. Like I have some skills, Sergeant Watson has some skills, and they aren't always the same. And that's kind of what makes a police department work so well when you have a diverse group of people with individual skills. At this time in 2019, on graveyard patrol, I was among other officers who saw this problem very much as every problem was a nail. And so we were doing enforce. And that was the strategy. And to us, it seemed like it was working. And so I say that because the city as this is a report from the police department on what we've been doing, it doesn't have all of the backstory of how Camp Alabama was created. But in that time between the news article you just saw and the end of 2019, I think it was the end of December 2019, Camp Alabama was created. And these individuals made their migration down to the area by the city shops on Alabama Street. And of course, it didn't look like this day one, but it didn't take long, and it became problematic down there. And unfortunately for the city, and I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know what would have happened, but COVID hit us. And the March 30, 2020, like that never happened, right? So we had it until December 2022, which involved numerous cleanups, moving from there to the other parking lot and then back to there, and all the issues, right? Highlands neighborhood experienced an increase in crime, neighboring businesses experiencing an increase in problems, and the picture on the left, packed City Hall, right? Council chambers when it was like 700 degrees in here, right? And so, right, you all remember that? And so this is what's happening. So the problem has moved to a central place. There's been an explosion in population. I don't know what the peak population was. Maybe the chief does, head count wise.
175.
About 175 people. It was an unsafe and unhealthy situation to live in, and something needed to happen, right? So this is Sergeant Watson again on the right. He's in a position now, and you'll hear more about that later, where he's daily involved as his primary job in addressing these issues. But long before that, he's been heavily involved as a patrol officer, or as a patrol corporal, and then as a sergeant, in like taking point on a different approach than constant enforcement. Although, and you'll hear later, he's our primary person for enforcement of these issues right now. He started to make relationships, started to engage support, started to connect outside resources so that we were doing things that weren't just enforcement, right? So that's been a project of his for a while, and you're going to hear about why that's important, because he's been building up to where he is now. And so December 2022, you want to add anything to this part?
No, I got up later here.
So, oh yeah, you're right here. So a part of what is now going to happen is we're in 2021. So I know that this slide says 2022, but we're going to live in 2021 for a second, because that was a big year for us. A lot happened. And so in 2021, a part of what complicated our ability to enforce the laws was the Blake decision, as we refer to it. Sergeant Watson's going to talk about Blake decision.
Thanks. As Captain McNew was mentioning, and you saw me in the videos and the photos here, I have made it a point as my job to be intimately involved in these people's lives, the people that are experiencing homelessness, to one, build rapport, to find solutions. And to that point, they see me and they recognize me and call me by name, Watson. They forget the sergeant part. It's okay. So as we were transitioning through our timeline here, another hiccup comes. Much like the Martin v. Boise, we get the Blake decision, which is the drugs in my pants, these aren't my pants defense that made drugs de facto legal in our communities for a period of time. And it happened to be the same period of time where we were having people out in our community that are homeless existing in public areas. And now, to complicate things, it's open drug use in our areas. I remember a period of time about this time where you couldn't go to a park and not see the orange cap of a needle or find some other paraphernalia. Completely unacceptable. But the tools that we as the police had before were, we could arrest somebody if we see them having drugs or using drugs in public. Blake decision came and that took it off the board for us. So, and people, the users knew it and would sit and use in front of us. So it added like this level of what felt like more lawlessness happening. It was a feel, though they are not breaking the law, it definitely feels like a step down from civilized society that's happening when they're openly using drugs and getting altered in public spaces. That has now been corrected. State legislature has enacted a drug law. Kudos to our city council at the time. They got ahead of it, and 45 days ahead of the state law created a Longview ordinance to address the open drug use issue. A story that I have, my first day back on patrol when we enacted our law, I grabbed a bicycle, I was on bike patrol, and I rode for 5 minutes and made my first arrest for someone using meth in our park. And I went and took care of the arrest. And then the next day I came to work and I went to a different park and made an arrest for someone using drugs in the park. And I think it was I did about 9 years in our drug task force, so the old, drug cop in me. And most of our other drug cops were like, oh, we can arrest for drugs again. The problem corrected itself, I felt, fairly quickly. We were, as our command staff had from above, is this shall be enforced. This is unacceptable. It's unsafe for our families. So that was our addressing the Blake decision and the impact that it had. It definitely added a little bit extra complication for us where we had lost a tool for enforcement.
So in 2020, late 2020, I'm now a captain. Chief Huhta is now the chief, and we are like at its peak of Camp Alabama. And these are all photos from what we now refer to as the saturation patrols. And so in response to the community and the reports of criminal activity, the chief authorized nightly saturation patrols. And what that means is we had officers on foot patrol, which, just in case you're not familiar with, the police don't do foot patrol generally as a shift anymore. We drive cars, it's a big community, we can get to things fast. We don't spend a lot of time on foot, but it's a really good way to catch criminal activity in progress, especially in high crime and high violent areas, like the area surrounding Camp Alabama at the time.
Cops are there every night. That might be important.
And if you weren't here a couple weeks ago, our regular patrol staff is generally 4 police officers and 1 sergeant on a shift. And so these saturation patrols were not something that they could handle, because believe it or not, we did get called in other places in the city than in that community or in that neighborhood. And so we had to find another way, and that meant staffing it with overtime. And so we had officers on foot patrol nightly for weeks, months, and it worked. We went down into the area, and the picture on the top left is Sergeant Streisguth. That's a person that he caught this is the Beach Street extension. He caught that person burglarizing that building. Just walking by, he sees this guy coming out of a fence. He'd committed a burglary. Unlike on TV, like this just doesn't happen every day. You don't just like walk up on someone coming out of this is a big thing for him to walk up on that. But crime was so prevalent down there, it was easy. It was like fish in a barrel. For a while. Lower left is a trespasser, Chris Collins. I called him one day and I said, hey, we have a real problem with Matheson Gas, like trespassers just all over, and they are fed up. And is there any way you could drop off a Jersey barrier with a no trespassing sign bolted to it so we can do some enforcement, because they don't have a good place to hang a sign, basically. Chris had the Jersey barrier dropped off within an hour, and within an hour of that, we're making our first arrest for trespassing at Matheson Gas. And if this isn't a video, it's a screenshot of a video, but if you replay this video, the guy says, well, I didn't see the sign. And then in the video, he walks right by it. And then this sign's this big. And so and this was just one of many, day and night during the saturation patrols. Top right is a guy, this is the back fence line of Camp Alabama. He's not actually in the camp, he's on the Diking District side. And what he's doing is shooting a crossbow at Les Schwab's from the camp. So the officer in the photo happened to come around the corner and spot him just as he's like launching crossbow arrows at Les Schwab. Lower right, this is California Way near the railroad tracks. The reason this is important is this is a stolen motorcycle that this is Officer Heim. Officer Heim saw that motorcycle inside Camp Alabama, did some research, caught up with it right here, and it's a stolen motorcycle, and this is a guy from the camp. And so these were some of the just these are just the 4 pictures I picked out of many that I could have put on here of arrests that were made during the saturation patrols. And so earlier I said I see problems as nails. I'm the captain now assigned to this, so I'm out there hammering things. And so, because that's how I solve problems. And so we had great success with this. The saturation patrols started to become more boring as time went on, and which is good, right? So we're making arrests, and not just arrests, bookings. And so when I first met some of you, we were having a really hard time getting people in jail. And so to the chief, as a captain, you go, and he knows this, you go, we would love to go out there and hammer people. I think that's what this problem needs right now. We can't get them in jail. COVID still has the jail closed. They're only taking, like, unless you murder someone, you're not going to jail kind of problems. And this is just another unfortunate piece of timing that complicated this whole situation for us. And so the chief and the other chiefs, Kelso's chief and the sheriff, and then the smaller agency chiefs, they meet regularly, they meet monthly, and along with the jail director. And they came up with an agreement to allow booking these offenses, and that really helped us. When we started to be able to get misdemeanor crimes into jail, that really started to solve problems. And when I say solve problems, I mean like the acute problem, not the overarching problem of homelessness. This just solved the community's issue of rampant crime in the neighborhood because people were seeing consequences. And so I'm out there hitting things with hammers, and this is when the closure of Camp not because of what I'm doing, Camp Alabama is closed, and the creation of Hope Village. This is just a point in time reference. This occurs. The reason this is important is when this occurred, it displaced individuals, right? This held 50 people. This new situation holds 50 people. As hard as, and Sergeant Watson's going to cover this, we went in and tried with some of the resources he had at his disposal to connect people with, you're about to be homeless, what's your plan? Many people were displaced back into 2019. And by that, I mean, we're back to them on public spaces outside of the camp. And so we want to talk a little bit about the proactive work you did to educate folks before the camp closed.
Oh, yeah, of course. So you saw many pictures of the camp in various stages. Some of those you couldn't tell it from a garbage dump, honestly, and it was just not sanitary and not safe, particularly. At this time, I'm just a dumb street cop. I'm out there and I see a problem, and what are the tools I have to solve? I am a creative person by nature, so I like to have more than just the hammer to hit the screw with. I like to have a screwdriver too. So I thought there's got to be resources out here, social services that would be willing to come meet these people where they're at, because we know where they're at, and they're going to need resources so they are not in this situation anymore. So I started to learn more about what our social agencies were in our area. So as I mentioned before, I'm making relationship with the people experiencing homelessness and understanding their each unique individual need. So, and by that, I go back to, there was one of the videos up front of City Hall, and you could see me walking up and down and my patrol car out front. I remember walking several people up and down, news media, people that were running for office, and giving them a tour of what the camp looked like out here. And I would walk, and they would ask Sergeant or Corporal Watson at the time, well, isn't the solution we just need to have everyone have houses? And I was like, that's a solution for a couple people. That's not the solution for all of the people. Like, there's not one blanket response for everyone that they're going to push this button and things will happen. And we need to know, like, this person, there are people at City Hall here that had a job. This person has a job, but they have these issues, these hurdles to get over. Again, and I'm a dumb street cop. I don't know how to solve any of these. I just know what these problems are. And I remember walking one person down the line and explaining my spiel that I would give about how it's individualized, that we need to really figure out what's going on. At that time, it was Thanksgiving time, November, people are dropping off food, and now we have tons of rotted food out there because people went, they're hungry, let's feed them. And I went, did you ask if they were hungry? It's quite presumptive to go and shove food in someone's face and say, you're hungry, when they're not hungry. And so I get to the end of the line, I'm at a tent, I didn't even know who was in the tent, and I give him my wrap-up spiel and that's why we need to know what every individual needs. The guy in the tent, I don't even know who it is to this day, but you would think I paid him. He said, "Amen, brother. All I want to do is smoke weed and live free." And I was like, okay, well, that's where we're starting at with him. Okay. Then camp and all that. So going back to, I want to have more tools to do my job. And Chief Huhta said, you know what? They have this model of crisis co-responders. A behavioral health unit was created with these three gals here that we contracted with Columbia Wellness, that they are mental health professionals, and they have some expertise in interacting with people that have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and are dealing just in crisis in general, which includes the homelessness. So that's about 2021 where they come on board, and they were under a different sergeant at the time, and they were their own unit. And as any new thing starts, you learn by your successes as you move forward, and what's going to work best. So going from 21 to 22, they are on board and learning how they're going to apply their mental health, substance use training to work with within the police department. They were co-located in our police department. Meanwhile, Camp Alabama was closing, and try to connect people to resources as much as we can. The numbers, 50 huts were created, 150, 175 people. So that meant about roughly 100 people were encouraged to find a place to live that was safe and sanitary for them. And that leads to this, where we get people that are recycled. We're back out onto the streets. We're back out onto public. This is the beautiful Cowlitz River riverbank there, and more tents, not necessarily going at City Hall, but on our medians, on Broadway. It was okay. We can't be at City Hall, but Broadway's a median big enough. We'll put a tent there. And in response to that, City Council went, "That's not safe. We need to amend the law." And now the medians, it's not safe to sleep in the roadway like that.
Man.
Yeah.
So what we started to see was if we keep hitting it with the hammer, now we're just going to chase it around some more. And so what we started to see was we need a more comprehensive approach. And so Sergeant Watson's starting to hit on it, and he's going to hit on it huge here in a second. But the behavioral health unit, there's not always a visible crisis. There's not always a hostage situation or something like that. Their primary function is to help people with their acute problems, and connect them to resources. And a lot of those individuals are the homeless individuals we're dealing with. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so they are a perfectly timed tool. The creation of BHU the behavioral health unit was not because of this issue that was happening, but a perfectly timed tool to go, hey, a lot of the individuals you deal with are these individuals we're dealing with. Can you help us connect them to resources? And so we started to see them connect with individuals and then have success. Hey, whatever happened to Joe? Oh, Joe's he's living in a house now in Woodland. And you go, what? Joe's been on the street for 10 years. Oh yeah, he just needed a driver's license so he could get whatever. And you go, huh? Okay, right on. And so we started to see the tool have success. And so we would apply that tool. And when that tool didn't work, we are applying enforcement. And so one of the things we didn't cover was the ordinance was amended for illegal camping to an ordinance that was enforceable. So from 9:30 to 6:30, 9:30 P to 6:30 A, you can camp. At 6:30 in the morning, you got to pack up your stuff and you cannot be camping. So after 6:30 a.m. in the morning, during this time period, we started making illegal camping arrests. But not until we went around and said, hey, there's a statute, you can't camp. How can we, BHU and Sergeant Watson or everyone else involved is saying, we're going to start enforcing this thing. We know you're displaced. Here's some resources, but we're coming, right? The hammer's coming. And so eventually we started strict enforcement of shopping carts, which seems trivial out of context. But this is an important thing to the community, is the blight of these shopping carts all over town full of stuff. I guess I wouldn't have predicted it would have worked as well as it has, but when was the last time you saw one? Like, they're far fewer. They're out there. Don't get me wrong. Like, you're going to go out and be like, they're going to be texting them to me tonight. But if you recall, they were everywhere. There were hundreds of them. And now it's fairly rare. So that enforcement worked. And we started enforcing the camping ordinance. And we started enforcing trespassing. And some of these we'd enforced before, obviously, but we were enforcing them at a rate we'd never seen before, hundreds. And if I were to draw a graph, you would just see a 2020 spike where we just arrested hundreds of people for illegal camping, booked into jail, and criminal trespassing after a campaign of education. And we were seeing that work. And so in conjunction with the enforcement and seeing the education piece work for the individuals who wanted it to work, we started to see success. But we got to take a little bit of a detour, because at the same time, we're dealing with thousands of abandoned vehicles and people living in RVs on the street, all at the same time.
As I was bored one day, I realized there's a lot of derelict vehicles on our roadways in this town. And I made the mistake in asking how many were there. And our community service officers, two of them who had been working on the project, there's thousands that have been reported. And I went, well, that's a problem. Let's apply some solutions. The enforcement seems to work. We have tools on the books and laws to enforce. Let's start enforcing them. So we did a blitz, and there were thousands of abandoned vehicles that had been removed. Probably towed, but removed nonetheless. But what was complicating is some of these vehicles that are dilapidated on our streets are RVs, motorhomes, and such. And we had started picking those up off the streets as well. Then a court case up in Seattle happened. City of Seattle versus Stephen V. Long. The city of Seattle came across a pickup truck with a canopy. They tagged it abandoned on the street, much like we do here. And the officers came back to it, and it moved from the street, I think, to the city parking lot. And then there it sat and began to rot into the asphalt, much like the vehicle pictured here. And the police came by again and again, like, you're in a regulated lot, you have to be gone, gave it a ticket, and then ultimately they impounded and towed the vehicle after, I want to say months, but it was quite some time. Stephen V. Long sued the city of Seattle and said, under the theory that that was my home, and under the Homestead Act of the state of Washington, you can't levy excessive fines upon my home. And like I mentioned before with the Blake decision, the Martin v. Boise, it caused a pause to happen until we could get legal analysis. So for about a year, better part of a year, our tow companies would not touch a RV. If you said, I have an RV, it was, hello, anybody there? They wouldn't take them for fear of running in violation. Again, with time came better analysis, and legal opinions came out. And even I read Stephen V. Long, and it says even at the bottom of it that the courts realize that it is the duty of the city to clear the streets, and they have the duty to do that. You just can't levy excessive fines. We weren't levying excessive fines upon people that were storing their RVs on the city streets. It's a $35 fine. That's hardly inappropriate. The next part was, well, the tow company has some fees. So tow companies, Carl specifically, we now contract with, who have the capability and ability to take these off our streets, said they put in a bid, and now we contract with them, like, we can handle this problem for you. And they have been a great partner in helping us remove, these are actual photos of some dilapidated RVs that we've come across to get them off the street. And if you've driven out Tenant, you'll see that if those RVs aren't redeemed by the owner, they are scrapped. And that's what's happening out Tenant Way if you drive out towards I-5. So if you've been listening, you notice that there's been a gap. So you've heard us say again and again, there was this problem. We had the hammer of enforcement, which that caused a problem over here. Then we had the hammer of enforcement, which that solution caused another problem and another problem. And now we've talked about, we have the creation of a behavioral health unit. And as an organization, we went, hey, these BHU folks, that could be a great tool in helping us resolve this problem that we have of a constant cycle of police enforcement over and over without the resolve for all parties involved. So 2021 Behavioral Health Unit was created here, and that was, like I said before, was in conjunction with Columbia Wellness. They came on to do provide some short-term intensive case management. What that means is when they come across a person, for the shortest term possible, they will get the person stabilized and get them to the next best resource to get them the help care that they need, be it substance abuse, mental health, experiencing homelessness. Did you want to jump in on this one or just continue through? Go ahead. Okay. So our behavioral health unit went through a metamorphosis. It was contracted with Columbia Wellness, and then in 2022, we as the city took over the full control of behavioral health unit, and it was our own now unit in our under the city. November 2022, an outreach coordinator was hired. The outreach coordinator had extensive knowledge of the people that had been experiencing homelessness. She had been doing outreach for 10, 12 years, and keenly knew all the resources and those individual needs of the people by their name. Like, I know what this person needs, and could communicate with them. So putting all things together, go back. So she was first hired under the Community and Economic Development here in City Hall. And so I'm doing my efforts as I am contacting the exact same people that the outreach coordinator is. And I found myself coming over here to City Hall regularly to talk about coordinating actions. And I would come over and they had other duties of handling permits for people that were trying to get building permits and whatnot. And I'm trying to have conversations of like, we need to work on this plan together. And I thought out loud, man, it'd be nice if I had an outreach coordinator and a BHU and me in the same spot. And I thought it out loud to the outreach coordinator, and she went, yeah, that makes sense. Then later on, I learned Chief Huhta was already working on that, and I didn't know it. And so fast forward to January of this year, end of January, the outreach coordinator came to be under the police department. I got tasked from being a patrol sergeant to being the behavioral health unit sergeant. So now I have all these screwdrivers for all the screws that are loose out here to tighten things down. Bad analogy. But so this picture here is what we do on a daily basis. So we're conducting outreach. I've heard it said before that all the outreach person does is they're an alarm clock for people. That is not the case. The point for the timing is it's very easy to find people when they are sleeping and camping somewhere compared to the middle of the day when they're moving around. So the coordination of our effort is starting at an early enough time that you can find people to find where they're at, and like where, not physically where they're at, but where they are at emotionally and socially, to get them coordinated to the next best resource. Oftentimes we will be out, we will contact somebody, and it's a BHU need. BHU comes on a little bit later, hand off that baton to them, and then they can run it from it there for the rest of the day. I think you talked about the bottom one, so we are co-responding.
Let me add something to that real quick. Yeah. Let me just elaborate from just a slightly higher level. So before the community outreach coordinator, he mentioned the alarm clock police. That is literally what we were doing, including the chief of police and the chief of police, the former chief of police and the chief of police. Like, businesses would call and say, there are people sleeping, I'm trying to open my business. And we would on a daily basis go along and say, hey, get up. They're trying to open. And this was like every day. And we were just spinning our wheels and spinning our wheels. And at some point, the community outreach coordinator comes on and is doing that to some degree, but is also going, you need to get up and let's help you not be here tomorrow. And I just thought, well, geez. And it's similar to the enforcement, hitting it with the hammer and moving it. They're just in a different alcove tomorrow. And so another example of a time when, like, we as the police, we can solve problems in the short term, like over and over and over and over again. But to really have results, we can keep water on the fire, but someone's got to come along with a blanket and help us out. Otherwise, when we turn off the water, just flames back up. And this is the higher level I was getting to. So what has happened now is, as we have learned and the department has seen successes, the chief has created this unit that has pulled Sergeant Watson to his primary duty is leading this team. He's not responsive to police calls, although he does respond on them, and we'll talk about that in a second. He has been pulled off the 4 officers and a sergeant because they have conflict, right? They have emergencies to respond to and they have other things. But at the same time, this really important community issue is like flaring up over here, which to a police officer, I won't say it's not important, but like when someone's shooting over here, like this issue of like bums in your alcove is less important. But not on a community level. It's very important. And so to address it appropriately, the department had to pivot its resources and go, Sergeant Watson is going to lead this team of resources and address this in an appropriate way, where we have an individual who's capable, highly capable of enforcement, and these other resources. And so pairing the community outreach coordinator who's doing her thing with the behavioral health unit, because there's often a nexus of substance use disorder and mental illness, with Sergeant Watson and his experience, it's like, holy smokes, look out. Like we are, and you're about to hear a little bit more about it, we're seeing like really serious results from that. That's been critical. That's what I want to say.
I appreciate that. This has been touched on about the behavioral health unit and the the crises that we experience. Like Captain McNew had said, it's not always hostage situations, crises, but it's the individual crisis that people have, mental health, welfare checks, disorderly conduct people, suicidal subjects and substance, obviously. Our BHU are much like police officers now. When they have no one in their grasp what they're working on, they go out on patrol and they look for people that may have a police call coming. We'll say they can observe and see behaviors. They know vast majority of the people out here can tell if they're baseline or if they're escalated, and they will stop in. And it's a wonder and a help for us. I just got word from another patrol sergeant today. Thank you for the BHU for being out there. They are saving our time on calls for service that again, the street cop doesn't have all the tools for, and also not necessarily always the time for, because the radio is always talking in our ear of the next emergency that's going on. The numbers over here, the unique contacts, that means individuals, a unique individual, 553 different names. Year to date, we're at 250, probably going to be back up where we were in 2022. I have this in here with, speaking of the outreach coordinator and the people that are occupying doorways that do not belong to them. The police, for us to make a police case for trespassing, we have to have an owner that's willing to say, this is my property and I do not want the person there and they're not supposed to be there. It really became problematic for our graveyard patrol people. And I know former Chief Dusha knows this very well, that we often would come across people that are in a door stoop and they say, the owner said I could stay here. And what is the graveyard officer to do? Do they wake up, they go through the process trying to find out who the shop owner is at 3 a.m. to wake them up to say, is this person supposed to be not? So, okay, well, I don't have enough to make an arrest, so I must move on. And so then the day shift person comes in and there's a business owner who's mad, like, why didn't the police do anything? Let's bridge that gap. And so to bridge that gap, our outreach coordinator has, to the tune of 150 some businesses, we've created a form so we could have on file from a business owner, I do not want people trespassing or doing these unsavory things on my property when I'm not there. Don't wake me up at 2 a.m. to ask me. I'm giving you permission. This is not the police department going and doing security work for people. It is for if we come across somebody and we know that they are trespassing for sure and can make a criminal case, we will refer to this document here. And that's been one of the follow-up things that the outreach coordinator has been working on and maintaining.
So, and we're coming to the end of this part of the presentation. We have seen great success in this multifaceted approach where we've come a long way since 2019 and the enforce. We've recognized as an agency and as a city really that only works temporarily. We need to involve these other disciplines. And so we're seeing great success with Tim's team doing its work. We're seeing patrol officers who are, like we've said before, they're very busy. This is something off their plate when Sergeant Watson's team's doing its thing. And at the root of it, we're seeing people who need help actually get help, right? We're not just going and moving them and arresting them. We're seeing individuals that we've been dealing with as long as I've been here, as long as Tim's been here, as long as these guys have been here, that they're just gone. And it's like I said earlier, where's Bob? Oh, well, he's living in Bend, Oregon now. He owns a ski resort. And you just go, what? and I make that joke, but like there are like we're not going to talk about it because of it all involves some healthcare stuff, but like we're talking about seriously chronically homeless individuals who are just gone from the community that you would definitely recognize are not on the street anymore, who've been helped, not by me arresting them and not by the patrol officers arresting them, but the resources have been offered to them. That said, some individuals are more stubborn than others. And so one of the things I like to point out is we'll get a complaint like, the gazebo is a good example. The gazebo is full of homeless people. Well, we'll go over there and there's one guy with 700 pounds of things. And it looks like a lot of people, but there are so many fewer individuals out in view in the public. And for those individuals who have chronically refused resources, who are openly committing crimes in front of us, we continue to enforce the law strictly with very little grace for individuals that we've dealt with before. There's no grace. I'll just be honest. If we've dealt with you before, we're just going to continue to enforce the law until you get the point, or something else changes. And so that includes the drug law changing was big for us, putting a stop to open drug use. It's less common to go to the 15th Avenue Safeway now and see open drug use in the front of the building. And so we're seeing some success, but only in conjunction with the work that Sergeant Watson's team's doing. And so we're still out there enforcing. Put this slide in because I thought it's symbolic, right? It's an empty gazebo, and anybody who follows the city affairs knows why that is symbolic, because it looks like this more often than not now. So I feel like we've had some success as a city, certainly as a police department, we've seen some success, and that's kind of a product of us learning as we've gone along. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I took a picture 2 days ago of the gazebo, daylight, and it looked just like this. Hopefully you've all seen we have come a long way in the last 5 months. Looking out this window is dramatically different today than it was 5 months ago, 6 months ago. And it is because of all the things that we've talked about. We're willing to try new things with the Longview Police Department. And especially from the street cop guy, the support we get from our administration, from city council, that we want what's best for our community. I have two stories. One, city manager knows when I get in and when I start doing my work, and he messages me, Tim, there is a tent at that park. And I lose my mind for a second. How is there a tent? This was 2 weeks ago. How is there? We have educated and enforced, like, everyone should have this down. I'm like, so I am, no joke, I am firing up my computer to get the ticket ready and the handcuffs all ready. Someone's going to jail. I can't believe. I turned the corner and there is a full-on tent set up in the park. A tent. And it's like right here. Yeah. And it is beyond camping hours at this point. You can't camp in our city parks at any point, but it is all bad things are happening right now. And I can't believe it. So I walk up to the tent and I shake the tent, Longview Police Department, get out, and I hear rustling around inside. Shake it again, I'm kicking at it a little bit, getting no response. And I can't believe this person is in here, won't even respond to me. So I'm shining my light and shaking again, and I hear a person respond loudly, "Who is it? Who's yelling?" I'm like, I've been yelling at this tent, like, who is it? Guy opens up the tent flap. I don't recognize him. That for me, that's clue one. If I don't recognize this person after spending roughly 10 years in this community, he's virtually deaf. We had to communicate on my phone by typing on my phone in the largest font I could get because he's virtually blind. And I'm like, wow, how did this happen? And it's a brand new tent. And I'm an Eagle Scout, and this tent was set up nice. And which is also not my usual. Usually it's like a duct tape around a toothpick to make it stand up. Communicating with this guy, newly homeless, didn't know what to do. I don't even know if he knew how to ask for resources because he couldn't through this communication. Somebody gave him a tent and said, walk that way and camp. And he walked that way and camped. 1 hour later, back up. Community outreach person, come meet me over here. 1 hour later, we've handed the person off and they are at the resources, no longer homeless. Bridge that gap within an hour. Another story. This one happened, I would think it was the same week, about 2 weeks ago. We get word that there are possibly people trespassing in the mint farm again. So we head out by one of the waterways, come across a person who I know, and I get greeted with, "Hey Watson, how's it going?" before I even see them, so I know the person. They are literally laying in grass like if you had just fallen over in your own vomit type situation, and try to figure out what's going on. Do you want to get help? Seem resistant to help? All right, move on out. Like, is anybody else out here? Yeah, there's a guy that's out here a little bit further, and he used a word for indicating the person was developmentally delayed. Okay, down that way. So I walk down that way with our outreach coordinator, and as I crest a little knoll, looking down into this bog, there's trash about, and this dirty face pops up, and like, oh gosh, I don't recognize this person either. What's going on? Instantly recognize that this person is severely developmentally delayed, and I'm like, what are you doing down here? I'm just a bum. And they held their head down, and I'm like, you're not a bum, you're a human being. Get out here. Walks out wearing shorts, and this was a couple weeks ago when it was nasty outside, and they're barely held on. Obviously, he's lost, I would guess, probably 20, 25 pounds by the way the clothes don't fit. We walk out, I'm doing some research on my phone, find out this person does have some diagnoses, that they are a mentally ill person. They walked out of a home. They didn't know if their parents were dead or alive, partly because of their mental health situation. And also just time had gone by. I'd been out there for a couple weeks, just laying in the muck. So I was out with outreach. We called BHU. This person needs mental health stabilization. Short-term intensive lasted for us to get him through the night and handed off to the next best resource for the person, and then they were housed. So that one took us about 24 hours to get accomplished. That's the work that we're doing right now. And I don't know how, as the police department, we get that accomplished. I don't know how as a community we get that accomplished without continuing these resources. The coordination with the police department, the outreach coordinator, and behavioral health unit.
I had not heard that story. That was an awesome story. Thank you. So the next slide says questions. So I'm going to end with this, and then we'll go to the question slide. And that is, we have a tradition at the Longview Police Department. It predates me. I think it probably even predates the chief of police, current and former. And that is, we take enforcement of the law and protection of the community very seriously. And so we are all about strict enforcement of the law here. It's so much so that day before yesterday, I have an opportunity, and this is the example I'll give. An individual comes in, they shoplift at Bob's, and I don't get to go on a lot of calls, but I happen to go on this one. And it's a lady, she's in the office for loss prevention, and she's surprised when the officer I'm standing with says, no, you can take that off. She's got stolen property. She's wearing all their property. And she says, well, let me just take it off. And the officer, a female officer, she says, no, you can take that off at the jail. And she is shocked. She says, I'm going to jail? And the officer says, you stole like $500 worth of stuff. Of course you're going to jail. And she says, well, can't you just like PR me? Or she was using terms like she's been through this before in other communities. And I grabbed her ID from the officer and I said, you're not from here, are you? She goes, no. I said, well, let me educate you. Here in the city of Longview, we take many things very seriously. One of those is shoplifting. And if you want to come to Longview from Pierce County and shoplift, you're going to go to jail for $1. That's just how serious we take it. And the business is going to tow your car, and we're just not messing around. Don't bring that here. And that's sort of the attitude we have with everything as a police agency for people who want to come bring crime to our community. And I think that, in conjunction with the more compassionate services, makes us awesome. So, questions?
All right, council, questions. Not everybody all at once. Somebody was taking notes. Somebody has questions.
Mayor Boudreau,
Go ahead.
may I ask a question?
Yep.
Thank you. I'm always curious. I know that a high percentage of the community mainly is concerned because taxpayer dollars are helping Hope Village, et cetera. Is the confusion of how many of these displaced are coming from out of the area versus how many grew up here that are really getting the services? If you could answer that, thank you.
I want to make sure I got your question correct. You're asking of the people who are experiencing out in the field, how many are originally from Longview and how many are transplants, if you will?
Well, when I was at United Way, there was a way that our agencies would find out in serving clients. And they had to show that they either had a previous address in Longview, but then it started getting more vague. Maybe they had a friend that lived here, so they would be able to get services. It wasn't as strict. And I'm just wondering, for instance, with Hope Village, how are they showing, or what is the intake question of, are they from here, or can anyone come from anywhere in the area and get those services?
So police department doesn't run Hope Village, and we're not in control of their intake. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I can speak to the experience that I had out on the field. Like I mentioned before, I know most of the faces, so would mean I've had regular contact with them. And the police department doesn't keep track of that statistical data of like where is a person from compared to where they are now. So I don't know if I'm able to answer that question. It might be better answered by the Salvation Army for their policy.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I guess we can just add anecdotally to that. At its peak, we were dealing with a number of people who were from outside of our community. I believe that's less now. Where occasionally we'll see someone pop up into town. Frankly, they are very surprised when they meet us day one. And we often say, we suggest you return to the place where this was easier for you. But we don't experience a great deal of people now that are from outside the community. That's just anecdotally. But as far as Hope Village, I'm not sure. Go ahead, Chief.
So my observation, we're probably dealing with, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong because I get things wrong, probably a dozen or less of the chronically homeless that we're dealing with. Of those individuals, there are several of them that I have dealt with my entire career. And so where they came from originally, I don't know, but so I've been doing this for a couple of years now. I've been dealing with them my entire career. And I know Chief Dusha was dealing with them when he was working streets. So were they born in Longview? I don't know, but I say the ones that we're dealing with now are from our local area, or at least we've been dealing with them for many years because we ran the other Cowles County individuals out.
Thank you for answering that. I just want to thank all of you for the work that you've done. As you said, the last 5 months has been so much better. I've been sitting here for 5 months and watched it. And I just want to thank you. It does not go unnoticed at all. We hear about it a lot in the community of the efforts that you've taken. The Blake decision was difficult, and I understand that, and that now has been reversed. But thank you very much. I like how you talked about the bridge of the community outreach coordinator, behavioral health, law enforcement, and the city. There's no better partnership than those 4 entities to continue that going. And I just want to thank you so much.
I appreciate that, and I'd be remiss, you hit the nail on the head. I only mentioned but a few departments, but it is a holistic approach where you have Public Works, Parks Department, Urban Forestry. The list could go on. Mostly it's because of the outreach coordinator pulling all the strings that she has learned through in the city. But yeah, the city is working efficiently now. Correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Council, further questions? Ruth, go ahead.
Sure. I just was wondering, as you worked over in the past few years, and I know you're familiar with, there's a lot of people you're familiar with, and you can kind of have a rough count of the folks out there in that category. But how has that population changed over the last 4 years with your recent efforts? Has it more or less? Are they the same, different people? And how is the prevalence of the mental health and substance abuse, how has that changed, or over that time period that you've been working so intensively with?
Yeah, you asked a huge question, and I know you know that. The population, the numbers. The numbers we are encountering are dwindling. Like Captain said, or Chief said, there's a dozen or so now compared to the hundreds of encampment that were out on what I would call the peak there at City Hall, and then at Camp Alabama. Maybe you're asking, or maybe I'm receiving this as like, what is causing the resistance from people, or what is it? What of we're experiencing the troubles?
No, I just want to know. My sense is that over the last 4 or 5 years that I've been actively involved, that I see a lot less issues around town, and I'm just wondering if, from your knowledge of the number of people that are unsheltered people that are out there, is that a good perception, or is it just less visible?
I have the same perception, and I'm the one out there looking for people. If I were to even just go back a year, it was common. I was working nights. You had worked nights a couple times too, and we have the problem with people trespassing in the downtown area, and also people abusing the park hours. And at the beginning of this year, we started to focus more our teams on it, our patrol teams, and then again going to me taking over BHU and opening up that flexibility. That week 1 compared to week now is dramatically different. I would spend a couple hours the first part of my shift going from person to person to address the crimes that are occurring. The last couple days, I've had a day where I didn't have anybody that I needed to contact that were in violation of a law. Now, did the outreach coordinator contact people? They did. She did contact some people, but the number is dramatically less. Which is good news. And also point, always when we do presentations like this, it's nice to have numbers and metrics. And this is one thing that when I took over the unit, I am intentionally not keeping some of those numbers, because numbers, if I take a day off or a week off, that's a week off with no numbers collected. So it would be artificial to say we had a decrease on week number 3. So what we're stuck with is this anecdotal evidence and what our eyes see. And I think our eyes are telling us we are seeing something dramatically different.
May I?
Yeah.
I'll just add to that, because he hit on something. If he takes a week off, we miss out some numbers, but another thing happens, and I think it's good for policymakers to know, is if we let the pressure off, it almost immediately overnight reemerges. So part of what we're doing is we have our finger in the dam still. We have 3 fingers in because we're doing multidisciplinary approach, but we still have fingers in the dam. And so that's important for policymakers to know that if you relieve the pressure, the dam will break.
This is, we're tooting our own horn up here, which is hard to do, but this is no time for a victory lap, right? Like we have found something that is working, we think. Like we're still testing this theory and it seems to be working. So, but it's as you say, it's no time to take a victory lap, but we still have people that need services out there. And so we're going to forge through on that.
Mayor Boudreau.
Go ahead.
Sergeant Watson, I applaud the work that you and your team are doing. Yeah, it's hard to put the words together on what that means to this community and the folks that you've helped. In your team's work with the service providers in the area, are you able to identify gaps in those services? And what does it look like? Do you have regular meetings with these services? They all come together in one room? Give us a little idea of what your interactions with those services look like and your approach to kind of assessing what it is that we can actually do in the community and where are our gaps.
Yeah, here's the biggest gap that I encounter, or our team encounters, is a person who has co-occurring, happening at the same time, mental health and drug use going on. And before taking this position or getting better educated on it, we'd always do this chicken and the egg. Well, which is first? What were they, mental health or drug use? Doesn't matter for where we're sitting to solve the problem. Obviously, it's easier to solve the drugs, stop taking drugs, but it's harder for someone to just say, be mentally well, right? So for services that are in our community, the biggest gap is a person who has those things happening and we take them to a substance abuse, a rehab center and say, this person needs, help kicking drugs. Well, they have too much of a mental health problem and they're above our level of care. Back out to the street. Okay, so they need mental health. Go over to the mental health providers. Mental health providers, this person has severe mental health problems. Yeah, but they're on drugs. They need substance abuse. Put them back to the street. And that's where we are bridging the gap is our BHU people find out which one of those two is easier to stabilize, get the person stabilized so they can get in one of those doors. So that's where the gaps are happening. It's too acute for agency A, so they can't go to the agency B as well.
There's been discussion on a county level on the juvenile center being a possible solution for housing such individuals where then the individual care providers can come in where they're in a stabilized environment. That's kind of been kicked around as an idea. I'm just curious your thoughts on that, if that would be something that you guys would be behind, if that would help solve the problem.
Absolutely, we would be behind that. So I've tried to work with different groups, other elected officials for probably the past year or so, and we've had several conversations about this very issue. It's probably been even longer than that now. That is a significant gap in our community. When I say community, not just Longview, but Cowlitz County. We need a long-term facility that treats both mental health and substance use, both co-occurring disorders. And it can't be a 30-day inpatient stay facility. Medicaid will only cover a 28-day bed stay. That is not even close to the amount of the time necessary to get someone the help that they need. You can talk to, say, a substance use disorder individual, and they will tell you you're going to look at minimum 60-day stay, if not 90 to 120-day stay. We have none of those facilities in our community, and those are rare even around the state. Fortunately, our team has done a great job of making relationships with agencies outside or entities outside of our local area. So if we can get someone the help that they need, they're willing to go, we can send them over to Spokane, we can get them down Vancouver, or even into Portland, or further north and in Washington. So you talk about a gap, absolutely that is a massive need in our community. to tackle. That's the next step. That is a bigger scale issue. To build one of those facilities, you're looking at millions of dollars in funding necessary to make that happen. That is a goal of mine. I would love to see happen before I retire. That is a necessary need for us.
Do you happen to, you're aware of that conversation, correct, about the juvenile center?
I've been involved in many of those discussions.
Okay. Do you have anything to report on where that discussion sits? Is it still purely pie in the sky, or is there any concrete progress?
Conversations start taking place. It's going to take everyone coming together and be willing to say, hey, we've identified the need. We have to find common ground. And I think that's one common ground we can identify, I think, as I try to stay out of the politics of things. But I think if that's one area that I think I would hope to see that we can come together as a community to address, because from my standpoint, it is definitely a glaring need.
Thank you.
But if I may, Eric, just before you go, piggybacking straight off of that, where do we go from here to work towards that? What can the city government of the city of Longview do to work towards that? Do we need to call everybody else from the other cities into a room and say, here's a need, here's a facility, let's work with the county to make it happen? Where do we go from here?
I think the next step is to get this work group put back together, see if they're willing to come back together. And I'm willing to try to champion that again, like I did back in December. Obviously, there's been a lot of moving parts in the city over the last few months, and I think it's time to restart that and move forward, and I will make that commitment to continue trying to champion that going forward.
Thank you. Eric?
Also to piggyback on that, wonder if we can bring the legislators and our state legislators in on that, if they weren't already, I don't know.
Senator Wilson was involved in the discussion.
All right, thanks.
Where had that left off at last juncture?
To put together a framework of the plan, which I could be putting that together fairly easily.
Okay.
It's just making sure there's I'll say it this way, the political will to make that happen. It's going to take all the elected bodies in Calhoun County, along with our local legislative delegates, to be fully committed that this is what we want to do. Just being blunt.
I think this council has the political will to support that. I hope the other cities do as well. Ruth, you wanted to ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, okay, this kind of went along with my previous question, but last summer when we first did the Blake fix 45 days before the new state law kicked in, we heard a lot about a big upward trend in arrests and criminal justice costs at the time, how things were climbing, and I'm just have those leveled off, or what has happened with those costs, that cost trend that we saw that was climbing up as things have gotten under control. Are we seeing any of that leveling off, or where are we at?
So we hit a peak last year, as you recall. We had to do the budget amendment to add a significant amount of money to our jail budget. We will be needing to make another amendment this year, but those jail costs have come down somewhat. But as we continue doing this approach here, there's going to be a need to increase our jail budget going forward from what currently is for 2024.
Thank you.
Right, and I think it will. Good point by Captain McNew is also I don't think it will fully ever recover because of drugs being a misdemeanor now. And so when someone gets sentenced to say 30 days in jail for misdemeanor possession of drugs, that cost is now burden on the city of Longview.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know that was it's something that we had on our state legislative agenda last winter, was to try to get some relief on that, because the drug charges are now misdemeanors. I never really got any follow-up on that. Did we, I guess that
did not make any traction.
Didn't make any traction,
session.
So we didn't get anywhere with that. Okay,
Correct.
That's what I thought. So we need to continue pushing on that, I think.
Yep.
And our jail costs, as we continue to being allowed to be able to book people in jail back to like pre-COVID days, our jail budget is going to need to increase. I think Chief Dusham remembers this. I think our jail budget at one point, 2018, I think in the number, I think it was 1.2 million. Our jail budget for this year is like $500 and something thousand. we are going to be needed to be closer to that $1 million level in our jail budget.
Was there a decision to cut the jail budget, or was it just less requested during the budget process, or did a council take a vote to cut it?
There was some budget cuts from our jail budget, and then during COVID, based on to balance with all the lessening revenue coming in, there was a cut. I think it was $300,000 in that budget the year. But other than that, I don't think that was to balancing for the lack of revenues coming in during COVID. But
And that was never increased?
we've never gone back to that. And I made the comment to then City Manager Huhta is once jail starts opening back up and we can book people, our jail costs are going to go up. And obviously then there's the cost of just incarceration rates are going up because everything's going up these days in society.
I did have some questions that I'd written down during the presentation, if I may, Council. Decided to save for after everybody. So the BHU is no longer directly affiliated with Columbia Wellness. Is that true, or where is that what I heard?
Correct. They're in-house Longview Police Department employees.
What was the budget change and the cost change from, I assume, contracting with Columbia Wellness to having that now in-house?
No budget increase. We basically roll those costs over into the existing budget.
Okay. Are we paying any other entities for similar services right now, or I hear from people, we have 130 different agencies that deal with different aspects of homelessness. Is that one operation that was with Columbia Wellness that is now our own BHU, that's the only entity we were paying for services like that with the city?
That's the only one that was the City of Longview had the contract with.
Okay.
There. Now there was other money that council was allocated for like community house or other service organizations, but not to the work that we're doing.
Okay. And then I guess, Kalei, you had kind of asked this earlier. One of the biggest things that I noticed in Captain McNew, you had said, and you were out there in the camp, picking things up. At that point, when I was out there doing outreach and cleanups on the private property parcels, namely on West Side Highway and places like that in Tenet Way, we had a lot of people at that point that would tell us, we'd do the, what's your story? How did you get here? What can we do to help you? We had a lot of people at that point telling us they were from out of state. Lots of people from Florida, Illinois, Texas. Those are the three most common places that people were coming from at that time. We're not seeing those people here still. But what changed? Why did, I guess, prior to hard enforcement, did people just stop coming here from other states, or did they go to other cities for resources? What do we think caused that?
I think we still have people coming from out of state and as they're coming through town. I think that once they realize that they can't just set up camp wherever they want to, and we are going to enforce the ordinance, and then if they do not want to follow the laws, then they're going to be held accountable. The approach that we've taken, you've heard me say in a little bit different ways, of the 3E approach, the education of them, the encouragement, and then the enforcement, and taking those steps and we're getting them connected to those resources. For those who do not want those resources, they're being held accountable through the enforcement actions. And so I think they realize, hey, that's the options they have. It's pretty simple for them, either take the resources or take the enforcement action.
Perfect. My last question, if I may, Council. Does the department have an internal plan on handling the situation after the U.S. Supreme Court makes their ruling? Either way, do we have a plan for this action, or are we just waiting for that?
We're waiting for that decision. I think it's hard to predict what the Supreme Court will do. I don't think they're going to go and change it from what we're currently doing. So I think continuing the plan that we have implemented, I believe strongly that it is the right plan. Obviously, I'm biased, but I believe that the work that this team is doing, and with other departments in the city, I think we're on the right course of action here. Obviously, I think I'll say this, that we do have more work to do, and we can't stop. And we must continue the efforts that we're doing. And it's hard to predict what the Supreme Court will do, but I don't think they're going to go and say they're going to wipe out or make all of our current ordinances unenforceable. I think they're going to probably go the other way. I'm hopeful that they'll give more resources or avenues for us to take maybe other enforcement actions. But we'll be prepared once we get that decision, and we'll quickly develop what that plan will be. Like I said, I'm fortunate to work with tremendous people, especially these two individuals behind me, but also BHU staff, community outreach, our whole department, but also public works, parks. It's taken all these city departments working very well together. So I'm very pleased about that.
Perfect. Council, a few more
Mayor
questions.
Boudreau? Yes, I would like to say a couple of things. This is exactly why, when you talk about law enforcement in itself being such a huge solution in this issue, that is exactly why over a year ago, we were hoping and praying that that levy would have got on to encourage more law enforcement. So I'm positive and I'm hoping everybody online and present hears how important it is to support additional law enforcement. The other thing that I've seen, I want to thank Interim City Manager Jim Dusha for his already strong relationships that we didn't have before with our state delegation and our county commissioners and other leaders that should be a part of this solution that I felt we lacked before. So I want to thank him for that, because that is very important, that relationship between our city leaders and our commissioners and our state delegation. We are a team as well. And I just want to thank him for strengthening those relationships so far. And I'm hopeful that the community will support you and continue your endeavors as we add to your force.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So in the Martin v. Boise decision, was the shelter beds defined? Do they have to be low barrier shelter beds? Does anyone know? I don't know if we have the attorney on or. Sorry?
Yeah.
Do not.
I don't.
You guys know?
I don't believe it was strictly defined as whether that's a bed that could be open for someone. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And just to be clear, the Martin versus Boise case is not the one being heard by U.S. Supreme Court. It's the Grants Pass case. And so it's just going to be interesting to see how far they make their ruling. Are they going to just be strictly about Grants Pass, or are they going to open it up completely?
Right. Further questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Ruth, go ahead.
Just a history, and I never got the full picture. When the campsite was set up outside and you guys were watching it happen overnight, were there people helping move them, or were they just doing this organically? How did they know where to go?
Here's what would happen. Because I was on Graveyard and they would ask, we would say, you can't be here. Well, where can I be? You can be on private property with permission or public property where it's legal. And we would say that was the education they would get every night. Well, where can I be? Private property with permission, a campground when you pay, or public property. And eventually they heard that message. So no one on private property is giving permission. And so they're hearing us say, you can, because they're asking and we're telling. We're not trying to move them to City Hall, but we're saying, you can be on public property, but you can't be here at the Travel Lodge. You can't be here on the Beach Street extension. You can't be here. You can't be here. Well, where can I be? Public property, public property. Because at the time, that was the answer. And so that night that they moved, they heard us say, you can be on public property. Well, what does that mean? Like government property, and so we're giving that answer. And they said, like City Hall, I suppose.
They came to the government.
And you heard the interviews with the people who they wanted to be in the window so that they were tired of us moving around. And so no one helped them. I was personally present when they decided we're moving to City Hall, and we watched a caravan of people go from the 800 block of 14th Avenue to the front lawn.
Ruth?
This is kind of following on to Clay's comments, but if there were additional resources available to you, what kind of resources would be most cost effective? Would you be interested in?
So from the presentation a couple weeks ago, for officer wise, we have to increase our patrol staffing. We can't continue operating at 4 officers and a supervisor on patrol because of those calls for service coming in. So that's my first priority. The second priority that I'm trying to address, and we just applied for a cops hiring grant, I think I mentioned at that same presentation that we applied for an officer position and that would be through the COPS hiring grant. They only cover a certain amount of money, $125,000 total over 4 years. So therefore, there'll be a budget request that the remaining money be part of our budget. That officer position would be assigned to Sergeant Watson's team on helping on that side of enforcement out there in the approach that they are taking. So that's where that officer position. So I have to focus on patrol. Obviously, we have a lot of priorities in the department, but number one priority for me right now is increasing that patrol staffing.
So what about, I mean, we have additional, more BHD, funding for more BHU positions that we currently have?
So just a reminder, for behavioral health unit, we have 2 behavioral health unit positions that are in general fund. We have 2 positions from the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs grant, which is 2 years. And then we have approximately about 13 months left from a federal grant for 2 additional behavioral health unit members that we're in the process of processing for hire.
Let me, if I may, just add to that answer. He mentioned adding an officer to Sergeant Watson's team, but it is absolutely critical that Sergeant Watson's position be maintained. Like this is a trial thing. Moving him, we've not done this before. To put a sergeant over the behavioral health unit exclusively is new. This was a new idea, January, and him staying there is important. We saw BHU plateau. So the behavioral health unit used to fall. It's in the division that I command, and it fell under the training sergeant who had training of all officers, in-service, academy, new recruits, veteran officers, you name it. It's a full-time job in itself. The community, that same sergeant is in charge of community services officers, is in charge of community outreach, not the coordinator, but public events and things like that. So that sergeant was like stretched so thin. Hardest working guy in all of LPD, Sergeant Kyle Sahim. Maybe you've heard his name recently. Super hardworking guy. But every sergeant who serves in that position is the most hardworking guy in the agency. Behavioral health unit fell under him. Who he also now supervises the animal control officers, right? Because a patrol sergeant is doing patrol stuff, and so he's like the dumping ground for every other thing. And it was too much. So BHU plateaued. So the behavioral health unit was, when we took them over, one of the benefits of that is we got to manage them, right? Some clinical mental health stuff, like Columbia Wellness is the expert in, is incompatible with dirty boots and first responder work. They just didn't work really well together. So we had this like tug of war of management where we wanted to do cop type stuff in the trenches, dirty boot stuff. And that scared them a little bit because it wasn't their world. That's our world. And so getting the management of them was awesome because that helped us get over a plateau that we were in back then. Well, then we saw them plateau again because what they needed was a strong leader to go out and see things from just a little bit higher level, who also had some experience as a police officer. Sergeant Watson was perfect because of the work he'd done. And now we've seen them crest from that plateau again. But to keep that progression, like his position is critical, like it's very important. Sorry, Chief.
Thank you.
So just a heads up on that, you'll see that enhancement in our budget work coming up. So
that's what I mentioned.
So they'll be in the workshop already because it's we found existing money in this. I had some savings in another line item that I was able to move over to make the change happen this year because I believe it's the right thing. So we once again shifted priorities for a brief moment for this year, but to sustain going forward, it's going to have to be part of the budget in the next 2 years.
Council, do we want to give just about 10 minutes for questions from the public?
Sure, I'd love that, but I just have one more thing. Trish Junker-Rodman has approached us at council about a tremendous amount of information based on her knowledge, funding, criteria, et cetera. It would be wonderful for a person of her knowledge and experience to be a part of this team to possibly fill some gaps that we are not aware of or you might not be aware of. So I'm just curious if you've had any conversations with Trish Rodman?
I have spoken with her. I have spoken with her in the past, but not extensively, but it's welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
So I'm just curious, with our current camping ordinances and everything that you guys are using to do that enforcement, is there anything that you see that other cities do that we might be able to change in our codes that does fall within the current court decisions that might help you guys out?
Not that I'm aware of, and I'll just get a brief plug on this. So last year I had the opportunity to go to the FBI National Academy. As part of that experience, we had, I think, nearly all the states represented. I think maybe 48 states were there, and then several countries. So I think 27 countries total. We had robust discussions on homelessness, and it was interesting. This problem is not unique to Longview, and especially we had conversations with the states that are in the Ninth Circuit, which we all fall to: Washington, California, Oregon, so on. This is not unique to us, and so I believe that the approach we are taking now and enforcing laws that we can do right now within the confines of Martin versus Boise and grants passed, all that, I believe that we are taking the appropriate enforcement actions as allowable by law, without a doubt. And I firmly and 100% believe the approach that we're taking with our team now is the right approach. We just have more work to do.
Thank you. Well, council, we're at a few minutes to 8. Let's hear a few questions from the public and get wrapped up by 8. Go ahead.
First off, thank you for everything. I mean, you guys took on a burden that was put on you. I'm not talking about people, but I'm just talking about your hands were tied for many years, and you guys watched what that happened to our community. And good job. Thank you very, very much. And I am sorry that also your hands were tied on budgetary reasons and you didn't get the help that you needed and you cried out for. So I'm sorry about that. I think from this presentation, it is very clear that when things are not working together, there's a lot of failure. And I think one of the biggest things is enforcement and also other resources working together. And getting people resources or pointed in the direction. But then when individuals are choosing not to utilize those resources, enforcement has to be key. And please see that current years have proven that. And so I guess my question would be, I heard mention of not wanting to really do the numbers or record the numbers. I would push back on that because there could be, if you take a week off, this week was not recorded because I was not there. Having that, because my concern is, yes, Longview is doing a great job. If it is something that is part of this solution, we know that this is prevalent. And if we had metrics to show that this works, I think because we are sitting between Portland and Seattle, and we continuously get input from those cities of this is what works. And if we can prove otherwise, other people need solutions. And I think it would be very important to have numbers to show people that it works, if this truly is what works.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, to keep it short and sweet, first I want to reiterate everything she just said. Thank you very much, gentlemen, on being creative and finding solutions to major serious problems. I would like, Mr. Mayor, if I can ask the officers a question, and that is, of the 3 fingers you got in the dike to keep from losing control of the issue and having it run away from you, I'm wondering just how much solution in this overall picture that you would say that Camp Hope is to this whole solution of solving homelessness. I'm wondering if you can tell me a percentage of those problems. How big of a help is Camp Hope?
As we mentioned, and we know, it has 50 people there, so there's 50 people that potentially are not being displaced out into the community. From a purely just a police department perspective, and I know the fire department staff share the same because I've had a conversation with them. So from a public safety standpoint, purely, Hope Village is a great thing for the city of Longview. From our public safety response from that side of things only is, I think we had 1 call for service down there in the last month. We don't respond down there, but there are, like I said, That's 50 people that haven't been displaced. Would they all be displaced in the community if it was shut down? I can't predict that. I mean, I do believe that they would be displaced at some point. We'd be dealing with them out on the streets, but I don't have a good number for you on that.
Thank you.
How much more efficient would you be with 5 more police officers by this time next year?
It would allow us to potentially add the increase of staffing on patrol. I need 6 to increase the minimum staffing on patrol. And that is definitely a priority that I established a couple weeks ago in a presentation.
I'm not sure that answered my question, but I was asking how much it would increase your efficiency.
The percentage-wise efficiency?
Yes.
We're just going to reduce the wait time for calls for service, as I've covered in the presentation before. Reduce the increases officer safety, increases safety for the community. Efficiency, you're talking about response time to calls, I think is going to decrease. We're not going to have to wait as long because I have an additional officer who's able to respond to those calls for service. Increased officer staffing is going to improve efficiency of the department.
Cut down on overtime?
Not necessarily. I mean, you're going to have probably cut down on overtime. Where we see the biggest need for on overtime, also you have court costs where you have to send people to court to testify. The biggest thing right now is there are paid family medical leave laws in the state of Washington. We have minimum staffing numbers. So if someone's out on calls in sick or is out on medical leave, we have to backfill. And typically when you staff a department at the bare minimum staffing levels, you're backfilling with overtime to fill those shifts majority of the time.
Thank you.
I had some prepared remarks, but happily I don't need them because you covered all the points I was going to make. And I really appreciate the 3 E's. That's exactly how to do it. Be tough when you need to be tough, and kind when you can be kind, and creative when you can be creative, and just get things solved. Because we can't have people here that are just causing havoc, but we have to help the people we can help. It's a nice balance. And I'm glad you're working on getting a mental health and treatment facility here, because that's really lacking. Ever since I've got here in 2000, it's one thing I've seen, wow, they really need that. And I hope that happens, and I will do everything I can to make it happen. Thank you very much. You're doing great work there.
Tricia, you have packets there.
I do. I have some information for all of you. But thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. I also agree with Sarah with kind of pushing back gently on data, because data is very important, especially if you want to go after grants. You need to prove that your program, you know, and what you're doing is successful in order to obtain money. But I am shifting to Hope Village. Sorry, I thought we were kind of going to discuss that tonight. So what I have here is from the federal government, from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. What it talks about is behavioral health services for people who are homeless. It gives key information in here, and it defines the 3 different categories of homelessness. It's interesting information. You know, it's called Housing First. What is proven, and it's in here, does not work if we don't have the wraparound services. And there's a whole study out there. The federal government has put it out. So I think that's why I've been a huge proponent of Salvation Army becoming a behavioral health agency, so that they can provide all those services themselves. Plus, we need more mental health and SUD here, and they would have more control over the people that they're serving. The other one is from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. It's a performance evaluation and improvement toolkit. There's information in here on how important data is and different metrics that you can look for. Regarding Hope Village, I know that there's been 55 people housed. What we haven't been told is how many are still housed. Of the referrals that we've been told, there's been lots of referrals for mental health and SUD. How many
actually successfully completed the SUD assessment? How many are in intensive outpatient treatment? How many went to inpatient? For mental health, are they actively involved? How many people are still there at Hope Village that have been there since day one? And of the drugs that are found on site during searches, where are those being logged and who's picking those up? Do you have an answer?
I have, the only answer I have is for that last question is when they find drugs, they call the police and they turn them over to us for destruction.
And so are those logged somewhere in case log, like if you arrested somebody that had drugs and you have to log it? Do you have it so like if someone did a public records request, they would know that the police were down there, collecting the drugs and then it was destroyed?
The process is the same for the police department. If we receive evidence, contraband, such like that, it does go into our property evidence system and however the disposition happens from that. So yes, if there was a public disclosure request for what was brought in by the police officer, that's obtainable.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Jim,
and that's it.
Get answers to those other questions possibly in the meeting on Hope Village. Thank you. Go ahead. We'll take Ron. We'll take your comment and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Hi. So my name's Karina, and I am actually a founder of a new upcoming nonprofit here in Longview called the Community Kindness Center. So kind of the things that you guys were talking about, I want to help bridge that gap and offer those things. So my nonprofit, for me, I've worked with the homeless people for about 1.5 years, and I've met you guys several times.
You can pull the mic down too so we can hear you. You won't break it.
And so I got that question a lot of like, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? And so I hate that question. So this is kind of my solution. I mean, we hear the outcry from the community a lot and something needs to happen. So this is my solution of trying to make something happen. So we are dedicated to serving the needs of the homeless and low-income individuals. Our mission is to provide comprehensive support services and empower individuals, foster resilience, and promote the transition to self-sufficiency. We believe in the power of kindness and community, and we are committed to making a positive impact. Our services that we are going to provide is a meal program. We're going to call that the dinner table. We're going to provide breakfast and dinner for all individuals in need. We're going to have a sleeping program for 18 years of age and older for temporary sleeping. You can check in. You cannot bring anything on unit. You sleep. We'll offer hygiene for like a shower, limited laundry for what you're going to wear. And then you clock out, you check out. And then we want to do a life enrichment program, empowering individuals to overcome obstacles and thrive in society, to empower individuals to take control of their lives and achieve self-sufficiency, including it's like a day program for wraparound services for other agencies to be able to come to our facility and meet those individuals, and we all work together to support them the best. But our main goal is to help these people become independent and be able to rely on themselves. We want to break the stigma and the cycle of homelessness. I've met several generations of people who are homeless, their fathers, their mothers, and now they are. And so we want to stop that. We want to cut down on the crime. We think that by helping provide meals, that people won't steal as much food, or providing a place for them just to sleep will help get people off doorsteps. And we want to provide these programs. We'll be doing referrals to substance use, to mental health, and we want to help with employment and see what services we can do for housing. I know that's a hard one, is housing, but we want to at least try. We want to establish the Community Kindness Center, and we aim to
significantly reduce the strain on our community resources.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. You gave it to us. She'll give it to Kings. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation tonight. I learned a lot and was pleasantly surprised. I don't think of law enforcement in and of itself as a solution to people experiencing homelessness. But I learned a lot about the way that our local police department is working really well with the tools that they have. And I was really encouraged to hear how creative the local police department has been in adding to the toolbox and bringing in things that are adjacent to policing and enforcement that allow us to actually start to get at the issues that are impacting the people experiencing homelessness. So, you know, there's all sorts of talks about why do we see this increase in homelessness. I want to shift briefly over to housing. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, for the appointment to the Housing Opportunity of Southwest Washington Board. I'm learning a lot about housing and what we can do in our community to increase the amount of affordable housing. That really is going to be the long-term solution to reducing homelessness in our community. We know that over the past decade, the availability of units in our community has gotten really, really low, which makes rents go up and up and up. And with that dynamic, the cost of housing and the lack of availability across our state, that has been the driver of increasing homelessness across all of our communities. There's great information on the Department of Commerce website that talks more about the facts related to that and the research that shows that that really is the case. So I would encourage you, as you're broadening out your view and trying to look at homelessness in this comprehensive way, to really keep an eye on those housing solutions. And I know that you have worked really well with Housing Opportunity in creating the new Sunrise Village project and supporting that. So I just encourage you to keep those options on the table as you're thinking about that. And then turn one more time and talk about just one other part that I think is part of this kind of big picture solution is more services like the nonprofit that was just discussed, but people that are doing community-based care coordination. There are a number of them in local agencies that serve people in our community. These people are sometimes called community health workers or peer mental health counselors. They're people who have often been through the experience of homelessness themselves and have gotten training and education and are now working at agencies to connect with people that are still experiencing homelessness and help in some ways be similar to what I think I'm hearing the outreach unit is doing and the behavioral health unit is doing, but on a longer term basis to form those human connections with people that as Watson said, you're not a bum, you're a human being. That's really how we move forward, is have people in our community that want to have that type of relation with someone and help be there, right? Come back again, help be some of that prefrontal cortex that it's hard to use when you're in the midst of homelessness.
Thank you.
So there's all sorts of things. I encourage you and thank you for your work.
Thank you for your presentation, and it strikes continuity of services and the wraparound services and your 3 E's are some of the keys to what we're looking for services. We had a discussion at the Board of Commissioners meeting on Tuesday whereby the police or the incarceration department there asked for $457,000 of additional money to provide the services that when someone is incarcerated into the jail, their services end and providing the continuity on whatever drugs or alcohol or whatever they are, that continuity that we as the community take over responsibility then for, that they are healthy and taken care of during that incarceration time. That was a very good presentation. $457,000 was approved. But what it did not, the discussion says, when that person is released from jail the continuity of services basically drops off and ends. There is no wraparound. With HIPAA rules and a whole lot of other things, that person drops off into wherever world again. So I think in your follow-up discussions with the commissioners and your efforts, there is a gap that needs to be filled there also for providing continuity of services, tracking or whatever for people that in that situation. Jail is the beginning, of course, of another path of either opportunity to become self-sufficient, become whatever. It's an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, I think this was a great workshop. Thank you for your presentation. I'm glad to see the numbers and see the timeline. I think that's part of what's been missing in the last 4 or 5 years, is a beginning to end. Here's where our situation as we are handling it now started. Here's where we're at now. Here's what we've done between. So we've strung that timeline together. Eric, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just last 2 workshops now. The agenda's been kind of vague, and I wonder if in the future workshops we can add more info on the agenda so we can prepare better, as well as for the public.
Thank you. Anything else to add? No? Okay. Our next regular meeting is next Thursday. We have a 6 p.m. regular meeting. There is a 5 p.m. workshop prior to that. That being said, this workshop's adjourned.